My name is Moazzam Begg. I'm a Senior Research Director at the organization Cage International. I'm going to speak to you, inshallah, here this evening about a couple of things, but it's related to a trip I recently had. First of all, I want to address that. The Prophet ﷺ said in the famous hadith, إِذَا فَسَدَ أَهْلَ الشَّامَ فَلَا خَيْرَ فِيكُمْ, that if the people of the region of Sham, and though today Sham may be referred to as Syria or even just Damascus, historically speaking, Sham has been the regions today known as Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Palestine, and even some of Turkey. إِذَا فَسَدَ أَهْلَ الشَّامَ فَلَا خَيْرَ فِيكُمْ. If the people of Sham are corrupted, then there is no good in you. And the Prophet ﷺ at the time was speaking to the best of generations, to the Sahaba, of whom he said, خَيْرُ الْقُرُنْ قَرْنِي ثُمَّ الَّذِينَ يَلُونَهُمْ ثُمَّ الَّذِينَ يَلُونَهُمْ, that the best generation is my generation, and then those who follow, those who follow those. So he was addressing them, that if the people of this land of Sham become corrupted, then there's no good in you. And the hadith continues, وَلَا يَزَالْ طَائِفَةٌ مِّنْ أُمَّتِي مَنْصُورِينَ لَا يَضُرُّهُمْ مَنْ خَذَلُهُمْ حَتَّى تَقُومُ السَّاعَةُ. So that hadith, it begins with that, but it continues to say that there will always be a group of my ummah victorious, and they will not be harmed by those who are treacherous towards them until the final hour. And so on the one part of it, you connect the goodness of people of Sham. If they're not corrupted, then there's good in us. But also that there will always be a group of the ummah victorious. The ability to gain victory will be continuous. And as we see what's happening in Gaza right now, and has been going on there for close to 2 years, it's hard to think of victory in Syria without looking at what's happening in Gaza. Because after all, the two lands, in one sense, the land of Palestine at least, the occupied land by the Zionist state, now literally borders a land where a tyrant has been removed. So how do you look at victory in one place and essentially a genocide in the other? Well, first of all, if you go to Syria and go to just the areas where the Palestinians in Syria were based, and I speak of an area called the Yarmouk, or Mukhayyamat Yarmouk, the Yarmouk refugee camp, named after the great battle of Yarmouk, which in itself was the most decisive battle in the history of Islam after the Battle of Badr, in which such a large group of the Roman or the Byzantine Empire were defeated by a relatively small group of people, led by Khalid ibn Walid. And in Yarmouk, if you go into this place, in fact, I had thought that I might do this just to test people's understanding. I was going to take pictures and drone videos and then post them up and say, brothers and sisters, I'm in Gaza. And nobody would have known the difference, because it is just as flattened and destroyed as Gaza. And the residents of Yarmouk, which is just outside Damascus, are about 95% Palestinians. If you ask people where you're from, they'll say, I'm from Safed, from Jaffa, from Haifa. The people that were expelled originally in 1948 and then in the 50s, when there was a series of expulsions of the Palestinians who, as part of the Nakba or the catastrophe, tried to find homes elsewhere in the Arab world. And they set up, and originally they were tents, but then they built homes there and they built buildings, and the whole area is filled with buildings that have been destroyed. And one of the places that the government of Bashar al-Assad and his father before him targeted were the masajid. So if you go to the masajid, you'll find them destroyed. As indeed you'll find the homes destroyed, the schools destroyed, the hospitals destroyed. Pretty much what the Israelis had done. And it's important that we have a kind of an understanding that even when you go into this destroyed area, this is one of the destroyed areas. If you go outside Halab, parts of it completely flattened. Outside Humus, where Khalid ibn Walid radiallahu anhu was buried, his grave and the masjid next to it were also destroyed, but alhamdulillah, they started to rebuild it. But if you look outside, it's all destroyed. Destruction everywhere. Marat Numan, destruction. Homs and Hama, destruction in different parts of the cities. So there's few places to find that there isn't some aspect of destruction. And the numbers of dead, it's anything up to from 500,000 to 610,000, including people killed and murdered, buried in mass graves. And as I said, if you look in the Yarmouk camp alone, you'll see people, as I went and met people, we'd get out the car and sometimes go and walk and speak to a woman or to a man or whoever. We went to the house of this one woman. Inside, wallahi, it's black. The walls are black from the soot of the bombing. And she's living there with 3 children. No gas, no electricity, no running water. Barely any shops, no masjid. The masjid is beautiful, or was beautiful, but it's destroyed. You'll see Qur'ans burnt on the floor. The ma'adhana is got one little part of it that's standing, but it's just on a thread. The dome itself is completely non-existent. And yet still some people come and pray. They clean a little section of it and they try to pray there. The deen has not left the people. And you'll see pictures of shuhada that they put up from Gaza. So they've got pictures of shuhada, Palestinian shuhada from Gaza, to show and to remind that these people are very, very much connected to the resistance of Palestine. But that there was something taking place here that the whole world really didn't know about, that Assad was supposed to be this great defender of the Palestinians and part of this axis, as they call it, axis of resistance. But in truth, he did support some types of Palestinians. The communist, socialist, Arab nationalist types. But he did not, and I repeat, did not support the Islamic ones. And the greatest evidence of that is, you know, when most people go to countries and so forth, they like to go and visit the tourist sites. I did too, of course. The great Umayyad Masjid, the great fortress of the Crusaders called Krak the Chevalier, or Hisn al-Akrat, or Qalat al-Hisn. This great fortress that even Salah ad-Din couldn't take. It's written in history books. The citadel, Qala al-Halab. People like to go to these nice historic places. The graves of the Sahaba. Salah ad-Din is buried there. Nuruddin al-Zangi is buried there. Bilal radiallahu anh is buried there. Ibn Taymiyyah is buried there. Ibn Kathir is buried there. It was a great, great seat of learning, so people could just go there just for the historical content. You could spend your whole life there, and that wouldn't be enough. But that's not where I was going. Certainly, that wasn't the main purpose. I was going to the prisons. I'm still searching for individuals that had been captured by the United States of America in the war on terror, by the Pakistani government, for example, handed over to the Americans, and then sent on a rendition flight, not to Guantanamo, not to Bagram, but to Damascus. So people who think that America and Syria, that Syria is this great axis of resistance, totally opposed to the United States of America, there may be some dislike between the two. But who do they dislike even more than that? Muslims who want to assert themselves Islamically. And so amongst the people I met were people who were put on the plane by the Pakistanis, handed over to the CIA from Pakistan, and handed over to Bashar al-Assad, where they were sent to prisons like Farah 215, 215 Mukhabarat al-Jawiyya, the Air Force Intelligence Building, or Farah Palestine branch prison. Now you have to ask yourself, why would, in Syria, that is the great defender of the Palestinians apparently, would they have a prison called Farah Palestine, Palestine branch? Why would they do that? Who were the types of prisoners that they had in Farah Palestine? Well, it's named as such because the prisoners in there primarily, of course later they filled them with all sorts of people, were Palestinians. And the type of abuse that took place in Farah Palestine, in Sadnaya, in many of the other prisons, the secret prisons, it is hard to compare to anything I've ever come across. And I've been in some of the worst prisons. I've been in a British prison called Belmarsh, and it's like a holiday camp compared to anything in Bagram. Guantanamo, compared to Bagram, is like a holiday camp. When I went to see a prison after the revolution began in Libya, I went to an infamous prison where there was a massacre of prisoners that took place, and about 200 prisoners were killed. And on the door, as I was entering, the rebels had liberated this place. Somebody had written in red letters, "Mu'abbad fi Guantanamo wala yawmin fi Abu Salim," which essentially means that life imprisonment in Guantanamo doesn't even equal 1 day in Abu Salim. And I wouldn't argue with them. As a former Guantanamo prisoner, I wouldn't argue with them. And then I went into Farah Palestine and Sadnaya. And first of all, I thought about that. And I thought, you know what I thought? Mu'abbad fi Abu Salim wala yawmin fi Farah Palestine. That life imprisonment in Abu Salim prison in Libya wouldn't equal a day in this place. And you know why? Because I've come across horror stories, and of course I've spoken to some of you guys before about Afia Siddiqi's case, and that is one that still we have to fight for until she's released. But it's because places like Farah Palestine and Sadnaya had women's sections. And when we walked into the prison cells, there was the Zanazin al-Jama'i, the communal cells, where they had up to 200 prisoners squashed together like a room, maybe smaller than this, about this size. Maybe about 200 prisoners and one toilet between them in the corner. And people had to take turns to sleep because there's just not enough space. And that was the communal cells. The solitary cells were smaller than anything I've seen in Guantanamo. And I've spent 2 years in solitary confinement in a tiny cell, 8 foot by 6 foot. But this was like around 4 foot by 2. The cells. And people were spending years in those places. One of the brothers I spoke to, who now is in charge of the prison itself in Farah Palestine, he said, I spent nearly 2 years in this cell myself. And when I asked him, what was it like in terms of body counts? He said, so many people were being killed every day, we lost count. Impossible to count how many people were killed on a daily basis, either through neglect, either murdered, either through torture or malnutrition. But that's not even the worst. The worst is we saw children's clothes and women's clothes. And then I spoke to some sisters who'd been imprisoned. And you may have heard some of the stories. Why were their children in prison? What kind of person imprisons a child? I mean, 2-year-olds, 1-year-olds, babies. Why? And the truth is, in some or many of those cases, the sister, sometimes married, sometimes a mother, sometimes a sister, was impregnated in prison, forcibly by the guards. That's why they were children. And so when you come across the kind of pain and abuse that's taking place in places like that, you can kind of understand why there's a desire to get rid of this regime and what it was all about. Not just here, it was happening across the Arab world in different aspects of brutality, but I haven't come across anything as brutal as this. And there's this famous statement by Robert Baer, who's a former CIA operative. He said that if we want a robust interrogation, we want somebody interrogated properly, we send them to Jordan. If we want somebody disappeared, so you never see them again, we send them to Egypt. And if you want somebody tortured beyond recognition, we send them to Syria. Now, who's saying this? The CIA. How is the CIA working with the Assad regime when there's supposed to be sanctions between them, when there's no diplomatic relations, when they accuse them of being state sponsors of terrorism and so forth? All of that is true. But just like when I was in the Bagram detention facility, the Americans used to say to me, if you don't cooperate, we'll send you to Syria. And they weren't joking. They were not joking. But alhamdulillah, my dear brothers, one of the things I think is important for us, especially now, is what could never have been imagined over the past 50 or so years since the presence of the Assad regime is now that it's Muslims, practicing Muslims, mujahideen, who have brought victory and freedom to all the people of Syria, to the Christians, to the Druze, even some of the Alawis who opposed Bashar al-Assad. So now they look at practicing Muslims in a way that they never used to before. They would look at them before in the past and say, these are not much different to ISIS. Head choppers and extremists and so forth. They're not looking at them that way anymore. They're looking at them in a way that these guys removed the yoke of oppression that was on our necks for the past 50 years. And alhamdulillah, I think last time when I came here, I spoke to you a little bit about Afghanistan, that how I'd returned to Afghanistan and that place had been liberated after 2 decades of occupation by the most powerful forces in the world, NATO. And then to go from there and then go again to another country that has found liberation is really from the blessings and the bounties of Allah that no one could have imagined. It was unimaginable. And whilst we constantly in our prayers and in our thoughts and in our reminders think of the people of Gaza daily, because it's live streamed to our phones, it's never far away. Whilst they're constantly in our thoughts, success, victory, whatever you want to call it, doesn't just come in the form of taking power. When I forget the Sahabi's name, but he was executed or killed by the mushrikeen. He said words that were so profound that they echo through history. He said when a spear struck him, "Fuztu wa Rabbil Kaaba." When he was killed, he said, "Fuztu wa Rabbil Kaaba." By the Lord of the Kaaba. He's saying that in this, these are the last words he said before he dies. By the Lord of the Kaaba, I have won. By the Lord of the Kaaba, I have won. And he was right. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promises for Muslims, Ahd al-Husnayn, in times of difficulty. One of the 2 great victories or goods, an-Nasr or Shahada. Now when we think of Gaza, yes, what they've gone through is unimaginable. The loss of family members, the loss of life, the loss of property, the loss of wealth, the loss of safety, the loss of freedom for many, the loss of limbs. It seems complete loss everywhere, in every direction. But they've won where none of us else have. None else of us have won. Alaikum salam. The Prophet ﷺ said, لِلشَّهِيدِ سِتُّ خِصَال أو سَبْعُ خِصَال, that a shaheed has 6 or 7 characteristics. يَأْمَنْ مِنَ الْفَزْعِ الْأَكْبَرِ, that he's saved from the great fear. And what is the great fear? The hellfire. He's done, that's it. That's not happening for him. وَيَأْمَنْ مِنَ الْعَذَابِ الْقَبْرِ, don't we always throughout our prayers and our du'as constantly ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect us from adhab al-qabr, to the questioning of the qabr. For the shaheed there's none. He's having none of that. هل للشهيد عذاب في القبر؟ سؤال بالقبر. The Prophet ﷺ said, كفى بباركة السيوف فوق رأسه الفتنة. That it was enough that the flashing of the swords above his head, meaning now bombs and bullets and buildings falling over your head, people screaming, and that was enough fitna for you in this dunya that Allah Azza wa Jalla is going to put you through it again. That's enough. None of that for you. We're getting it. Unless we also die shaheed, we're going to get all of that. But then look at what happens to him. يُوضَى عَلَى رَأْسِ تَاجَ الْوَقَّارِ, that placed upon his head, on the shaheed's head, his or her head, a crown. الْيَاقُوتُ مِنْهُ خَيْرٌ مِنَ الدُّنْيَا وَمَا فِيهَا. One jewel from that crown, you know crowns generally have many jewels. One jewel from that crown is better than the dunya and all it contains. And the best, يُشَفَّعْ لِلسَّبْعِينَ مِنْ أَقَارِبِهِ, that he can intercede for 70 members of his family. Now these aren't just 70 ordinary members, these are 70 members that are about to go to hellfire. Otherwise, what's the point of a shifa? There's no point in the shifa unless the person is going to go, they're destined for hellfire, even if it's for a short time. He can intercede. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is sadiq al-wa'd. When he says something, it's going to be true. So this shaheed, whether it's a child, whether it's a woman, whether it's a man, whether it's an old man, whether it's a fighter, or whether it's a farmer, each one will intercede for 70 members of their family. Can you even think of 70 members of your family? So imagine 70 times now, what's the number? The most conservative estimate, 45,000 times 70. That's more than the whole population of Gaza. They'll be making shifa for more than Gaza. So they really have won. If they were to destroy everybody, if they were to wipe the entire people out, look, it's happened historically in the past. Look, go to Andalus. I'm sure many people have been there. There's little left of the Muslims there. And what's left over there has been Latinized. The masajid turned into museums with grotesque cathedrals placed right in the center, chapels placed right in the center of the masjid in Qurtuba. It's possible. It has happened before. Muslims have been wiped out. And we have to be prepared for that. Because like what we've seen right now, the most armed, most powerful nations in the Muslim world, some of whom have nuclear powers, some of whom have the largest standing army in Africa, like Egypt, or one of the largest standing armies in the whole of Europe, like Turkey, or armies like Jordan or Pakistan, that's a nuclear nation. They have the most powerful nations, or amongst the most powerful nations in the world. But they're happy to watch the entire population of Gaza not just being killed, but being ethnically cleansed. And we're seeing it. We're seeing it live streamed. But don't lose hope. For as long as there is a Muslim in this world that says, La ilaha illallah wa anna Muhammad Rasulullah, there's hope. That they can never take away. They can never take that away from us. And you know, one of the things I often give people the example of the Quran that we used to see abused, and I can't remember, I told you last time I came, if I did, please forgive me for repeating it. But the Quran was desecrated in front of us many times, ripped onto pieces, urinated upon, spat upon, swear words written into it. And we organized to give back the Qurans to the American soldiers because we didn't want to be the reason that they desecrated the Quran. But then how do we then, as Muslims, who have everything, we've lost everything, our freedom, our homes, the place where we're at, the food is so different, everything's unfamiliar, we're on the island of Cuba. The thing that gives us tranquility, أَلَا بِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ تَطْمَئِنُّ الْقُلُوبِ. The Quran is the one thing that's familiar, the one thing that helps us, the one thing that protects us, and yet in order that they don't use that as a tool to try to break us, we have to say, take it back, Ya Adu Allah. Take it back. Take back the Quran, because I don't want you to use that as an excuse to get to me. So what am I going to do now in my cell? I don't have any other book. They won't allow anything else. How am I going to learn the Quran? And not everybody is a hafiz. And you know what happened? Those who knew taught to those who didn't. The original way. That's how the Prophet ﷺ taught the Sahaba, without a book. There was no book at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. There was no book at the time of Abu Bakr when he was the Khalifa. The book only came about and was only compiled into one single volume because the shuhada were so many of the reciters and the memorizers of the Quran that the Sahaba feared. Abu Bakr was advised by Umar ibn Khattab at the Battle of Yamama that we're finding that every hafiz of the Quran is running forward, rushing forward. What is it? The famous Sahabi, Salim Mawla Abu Hudayfa. Salim is the slave. He's actually the slave of Abu Hudayfa. Abu Hudayfa is the son of Abu Sufyan. And yet, he's the son of Utbah. He's the son of Utbah and the brother of Hind. Yet Salim leads his slave master in prayer because Salim knows the Quran better. He's one of the great reciters and the memorizers of the Quran. What does Salim say at the Battle of Yamama? He sees people rushing forward and they're getting killed one by one. The false prophet has emerged and claiming prophethood. The Sahaba's response wasn't to put the Quran up on the shelf and read it. It was a practical book, a manual for life. And so one by one they're getting killed. And Salim says, بِئْسَ حَامِلْ كِتَابِ أَنَا إِذًا. He said, if I stand here and watch everybody get killed and I'm a Quran memorizer, I am the worst of Quran memorizers. If I sit back and watch and nothing happened, I do nothing. That was their approach to the Quran. And off he went and fought. And him and his slave master, who of course had freed him afterwards, were both killed in that battle. And the leader of the battle was Khalid ibn Walid. And he said, bury them together in the grave. As they live together, let them be buried together and inshallah raised together. That's the reason why the Quran is a book in the first place. Otherwise the Quran wouldn't, there was no need for it to be in a book. The Quran came to the people's hearts. And that's why the point of me telling you this is that if you think of any other religion, perhaps try the Buddhists or the Jews or the Christians or whatever. Ask any normal Christian Jew or Buddhist or Hindu, how many of your kids have memorized the Quran? Your holy book. The Torah, the Injil, the Mahabharata, any of those books, the Vedas. Which one of your kids have memorized the whole thing? Or even a part of it? How many memorizers do you have in your midst? Maybe one, maybe two, maybe none. Put that aside. Let's look at secular democracies where they believe that their constitution is the most important thing. How many people have memorized the constitution of Britain? How many people have memorized Magna Carta? How many people have memorized the Constitution or the Bill of Rights of the United States of America, which they swear by? This is what makes our society far greater and superior to yours. Okay, then why haven't you got people that actually memorize it? Because we know that's what's taken, the word memorize in Arabic is a hafiz. And hafiz actually means protect. He's a protector. It's not a memorizer. It's become memorizer, but it's actually someone who protects. So if they try to destroy every Quran in the world, we'd still have huffaz who would know it from Al-Fatiha to An-Nas. So alhamdulillah, this is one of the great things for us as Muslims. And you'll see in the people of Gaza that they have many more hufaz than they had at the beginning before 2006, before the Islamic movement came there. And sometimes you'll see they're reciting Quran as anesthetic. There is no anesthetic, not local and not general. The doctors don't have medicines. As you know, there's a blockade on everything, just as much as there's on food and on water and on electricity. There's blockades and a siege where they control what comes in, what comes out. They can't control who recites the Quran. They can't control that when a kid is having a limb amputated, that kid takes comfort in the words of Allah and uses that as an anesthetic. The Ummah is being taught something, brothers and sisters, if there's any sisters listening. The Ummah is being taught something. And for us, in a sense, it's a blessed time to be here. We see victories, we see defeats, we see the Sahaba saw victories and defeats. They saw Badr and they saw Uhud. They saw torture. They saw the first Shahida in Islam is a woman, Sumayya bint Khayyat. She's tortured to death. You see Ammar is tortured to death. You see, Ammar's father Yasir is tortured to death. You see Ammar is forced to say the word of kufr on his tongue, though his heart is filled with iman, because of the torture. And the Quran bears testimony to how his heart is filled with iman. We see all of that. So it's not like it's just all a rosy story. There's a lot of torture. There's a lot of abuse. If you look at the history of what Abu Jahl does, he strikes Sumayya in her private parts. That's how the first Shaheed, if you want to know how the first martyr of Islam, that's how it happens. It's brutal. It's brutal. They're buried into the sand deep up to their necks and made fun of and taunted. And you of course know what happens to Bilal. So don't get despondent. Don't get despondent. Jannah is getting filled with people, the best of people. And we can only say that if there's anything that we have done worthy in this dunya, that Allah accepts our du'as, that Allah accepts whatever money we give to support these people, whatever action we do to help these people in any way whatsoever, then maybe we share in a little bit of that reward. But alhamdulillah, this is really what I wanted to tell you. I know it's a heavy subject, but I don't deal with light stuff. I said to a lot of people before that, there's lots of events constantly taking place and people are talking about all sorts of stuff. And if we did a talk about, winning the heart of your wife, I'm sure it'll be pretty packed. Or about jinn, did a talk about the jinn, that'll be, mashallah. But this subject is what I and my organization deals with. People imprisoned, people tortured, people targeted by the state. Afia Siddiqui, Abu Zubaydah, Guantanamo Bay, Farah Palestine, Abu Ghraib, Diyala prison, Abu Salim prison, Belmarsh prison. This is our work. That's where we operate. And finally, as people are, our cage team is outside, they're collecting, inshallah. I hope that you can donate towards them either now or later. The work we do is exclusive. I'm not saying this out of any fakhr or pride. I wish we didn't have to. But nobody's doing this work. And this work is a fard kifaya. As we know, Allah Azza wa Jal has set the parameters of the zakat. إِنَّمَا الصَّدَقَاتُ لِلْفُقَرَاءِ وَالْمَسَاكِينِ وَالْمُعَامِلِينَ عَلَيْهِ وَالْمُؤَلَّفَةِ قُلُوبُهُمْ. All of that. But there's one particular aspect of the zakat that nobody addresses. And that is وَفِي الرِّقَابِ. Those whose necks are literally captive. And the people that we're fighting for are not what they would call there's a term, ODCs, ordinary decent prisoners. The prisoners we deal with are Muslim political prisoners. Meaning people who are imprisoned as a result of a connection to their faith. And so that obligation we fulfill as a kifaya, and if nobody does it, I believe all of us would be sinful. So please, inshallah, brothers and sisters, if there's any listening, do support the work of Cage. It's an organization that I've been with right from the beginning till now, and we have brothers and sisters who have gained an expertise in knowledge, in understanding. If you're approached by the security services, if you're detained, if you're disappeared, if you're renditioned, if you're tortured, or if you're just stopped at the airport, Cage is an organization that does the whole lot and presents its expertise to you without a charge. We don't charge anybody anything, but we take our support from the community, and the community has been our backbone. وصلى الله وسلم على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. جزاكم الله خير for listening.